In this lesson, we're going to learn how to use code snippets to navigate through a timeline. I've already got a file set up here, and if you can look at my timeline, I've got two layers currently. One with the 5 buttons on the left-hand side here. And if I highlight one of these and go to my properties just to establish that they are button symbols, with instance names, button underscore 1 through button underscore 5. And then I've got a main photo area down on the main layer. And if I move my playhead, you can see that there's a keyframe in each one of these frames, and each keyframe has a unique individual photograph. So it's basically meant as a little slideshow where I can click on one of the icons and it will bring up the appropriate photograph. Now if I run this movie right now, if I just hit my return key, you see it just runs through. And if I actually run this by going Control Test Movie, it's just going to cycle forever, as you can see, and that's pretty harsh. Let me close that up. So what we need to do are basically two different things. One is we need to control the playhead. So we really need to make the playhead pause on frame 1, and as we navigate to the various frames, to pause on those frames as well. And secondly, we actually need to add the interactive feature to the button so that when I click a button, it will actually send my playhead to another frame. Now in ActionScript 3, everything works in frame based. And I have what are called code snippets in a panel here. If you don't see that in your panel, just go up to Window and find code snippets. There it is right there. Okay. But mine is already open. If I click it, you can see there are snippets in here. So the first thing I'll do is I'll establish a pause in frame 1. And you'll get to see what happens when I establish my first code snippet. Now, what is a code snippet? It's basically pre-established ActionScript 3.0 code that gets applied basically with a couple of clicks and highlights. So by placing my playhead on frame 1 and not highlighting anything on the stage, I'll go to my code snippets. Let me just close this for a second and show you there are 6 different categories in folders. Now we're going to go to the timeline navigation, and I'll open that up. The very first snippet in that is called Stop at this frame. So I literally just need to double click on that, and it automatically pops open my actions panel, puts in the code, which is ActionScript 3.0, and very importantly puts in a commented set of instructions. Now I'm on a small screen, so I need to slide across here, but basically it explains what the code does and how to manipulate the code. Now in this case it's a stop action and we don't need to do anything to it. So I'm going to close that and show you what just happened. Let me close this as well. If I look at my timeline now, a new layer has been added, and it's always added at the top. It's called Actions because, as I said, all our code goes into a frame. And all of this code will affect anything in this column, if you will, in all of the frames across all of the layers where the playhead is sitting right now. This little letter A represents the fact that there is an action attached to that frame. And if I highlight that, pop open my Actions panel, you will see what's inside. Okay, so right now I've got a stop action. Now to test this, I really do need to do a test movie. So let's just quickly do that. Control, test movie, test. And lo and behold, my file is no longer cycling through all the photos. In other words, the playhead is not moving endlessly through the timeline. It actually has stopped on that first frame. So let me close that now. Now the next thing I want to do is add interactivity when I click on each of these buttons. The way I do that is I highlight the button on the stage, then apply the code snippet. So let me highlight button number 1. If I highlight that and go to my properties, you will see that it is a button symbol button type, and very importantly it's got what's known as an instance name. The instance name is applied to any item on the stage, and that means I can have 5 of the same symbol on the stage, but they will all have a unique instance name, which means that using code I can talk to these elements separately and affect them separately and uniquely. Now, this process will work in such a way that if I didn't apply an instance name, Flash will apply it on my behalf. But it is nice to actually name them according to how I wish to name them. So I've literally named them button_1 through 5 in this case. Okay, so there is an instance name already on each of these buttons. So again, highlight the button on the stage. Go to my code snippets. Now what do I want to happen is I want to move my playhead to a specified frame and I want my playhead to stop. Basically, you can either have it stop or play. So we're going to use the click to go to frame and stop code snippet. So with my button highlighted, I double click this. It pops open my actions panel and gives me a set of instructions. The short story here is with this code snippet, I need to go to the go to and stop command and change the number inside of the brackets to the frame number I wish to apply. In other words, the frame number in which I want to send my playhead. Now this was the first button, which correlates with the photo on frame 1. So I'm going to type in a number 1 in between the go to and stop brackets and close this. Now let me apply to two different ones and then we'll do a test movie. So I'll highlight the second button. And again, I want to send my playhead to frame 2 this time, which you can see is the same photo as the icon. So let me go back to frame 1 here. Highlight that button. Double click on click to go to frame and stop. And again, it throws all the code in my actions panel on the appropriate frame, and it gives me an explanation of how to use that code and manipulate it. We'll talk about the details of how this code works in another lesson, but for now, it's just good to know follow the instructions and make the changes accordingly. So this one I want to send to frame 2. So I type in a number 2, and I will close my panels here. I'll also save my file at this point and test my movie. Okay, so if I click on here, there we go. We've sent our playhead to frame 2, but the impression is that when I click the button, the photo gets replaced. Frame 1, frame 2. And I haven't done the other ones yet, so they will not engage. They are buttons, but no code has been attached. But 1 and 2 are done. And it's good to test it early so that I can just be sure that it works, and then I can move ahead with confidence and apply it to the rest of them. So I'm just going to quickly go ahead and do that. Before I do that though, let me just point out that my buttons layer, my buttons are persistent, meaning that they exist throughout the timeline with the one keyframe, and the one bit of code that gets applied here will apply across that whole span. Okay, so number 3, highlight it, go to my code snippets, click to go into frame and stop, change this to a number 3, close this, move on to number 4, click to go into frame and stop, again change that to a 4. Now if I had a bigger screen, I wouldn't need to close that window all the time. And finally number 5, click to go to frame and stop. Now it defaults on 5, so I can leave that, but I just need to make sure that it is on the 5, and I'll close that, save my file, and test it. Test movie, test. Okay, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, back to number 1, and they all work perfectly. So we've just created a way using code snippets, which is basically auto-generating ActionScript 3.0 code on our behalf, and it's as simple as selecting and double-clicking. And that's how we use code snippets to navigate through the timeline. Now I'd like to take this one step further and show you a better way to actually navigate, meaning referencing the frame labels rather than the frame numbers. So I'm going to show you how to create a frame label and how we refer to it inside of the ActionScript code. To make this a little easier to understand, I think I'll put some spanning in between all of my keyframes right now. So I'll just click up here and hit F5. Maybe I'll give it about 6 frames each, and then just move over and do the same for each of these. So I'm just hitting F5 on these and spanning them out. The reason I'm doing this is that when I put labels in the timeline, it'll be easier to read with the spanning, because if all of the frames are next to each other, all you'll actually see are the little red flags. Okay, so these are all spanned out. I'm going to create a new layer right now above the buttons layer, and I'll double click it and I'll name it labels. Okay, and then I need to match my keyframes to match the navigation in the main layer. So I'm just going to go in here and F6 on each one of these frames. Okay, now it may seem like a little bit more work, but there's a lot of value in this, as you'll see shortly. Now I'm going to put a label on all of these keyframes. So I highlight the keyframe, go up to my properties, and label it. So I'm just going to call it pick 01 through pick 05. And you see I just inputted in the name under label. Hit my enter key and on to the next one. So pick 02. Next keyframe, pick 03. And then highlight that, go to properties, give it a name, pick 04. And then the last one, highlight it, go to properties, pick 05. And close that, and I think I'll save my file again. Alright, so the idea behind the labels is it's actually a device that allows us to use for navigational purposes. And the advantage to that is if let's say instead of I'm linking to, let's say frame number 7 in this case in my action script, if I wanted to move things around on my timeline, I'd have to go back to my action script, and any reference to frame 7 I would have to change. So it's, number one, prone to error. Number two, it's a lot of extra work for nothing if you ask me. Now if we use frame labels and we refer to the frame labels in the action script, then the labels can move all they want around the timeline and the action script will still find it. So let me just demonstrate that now. I'm actually just going to go back into my code and replace those frame numbers with the frame labels. So I'll go to my actions panel here. Oh, I need to highlight the action layer as well as the keyframe with the action. Okay, highlight my actions panel and just go down here, and in the go to and stop I'll replace the number with the label. Now the thing with the label though, it's very important, it needs to be inside of quote marks inside the brackets. So quote mark and then pick 01 close quote mark. So I need to do that for all of the rest. So I'll actually copy this. I'll just go a Control C and then scroll down, and I'll paste it and just replace that last number. So Control V and make this one pick 02. And that way it's not dependent on the frame number, and that makes things a lot more flexible and a lot more efficient. Pick 3 for this one. Highlight that one, paste that in, replace the number to a 4, and then do the 5th and final button. And 05. Okay, I'm just going to close my actions panel and save my file. And we'll start by testing this, and then I'll basically prove the fact by moving my frames around, and you'll see that the playhead will still find the frame label. So Control, Test Movie, Test. Okay, so still working, no problem. Okay, so let me just again prove this point. I'll just go in here and I'll add some frames with F5. And maybe over here I'll delete some frames, so Shift F5. And I'll do a test movie. So as you can see, it's looking for the frame label and it will find it every time, regardless of the fact that it may move around on the timeline. And again, that means I don't need to go back into the code and change it anytime I make an adjustment on my timeline. Much more efficient, much more foolproof.